Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends, my name is Rebecca Joven, and I'm the Chief of the Vienna Office of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, UNODA, and your Master of Ceremonies. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to today's global launch event of the UNODA Disarmament Education Strategy, entitled The Centrality of Partnerships in Disarmament Education Efforts. We will be hearing from a diverse and distinguished panel today representing different perspectives and experiences, starting with some welcoming remarks from the United Nations Undersecretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu. Welcome, Izumi. Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu has been in her current role since May 2017, before which she served as Assistant Administrator of the Crisis Response Unit at the United Nations Development Program since 2014. She has many years of experience within and outside the United Nations system, not least as an educator herself, as a professor of international relations at Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo between 2005 and 2008. She is also a proud international gender champion. Izumi, great to have you here. You have the floor.
Thank you, Rebecca. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great joy and pride also that I join all of you today to launch the first ever Disarmament Education Strategy of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, or UNODA. I am very excited to be speaking alongside a great panel of individuals who are champions of disarmament education and also the work of my office, many of them long-standing partners and friends, as well as active participants in this collective endeavor. The Secretary General in his Our Common Agenda report warned that humanity faces a stark and urgent choice: a breakdown or a breakthrough. However, at challenging times like this one for international peace and security, when multilateral processes and mechanisms are at risk of eroding, violent conflicts with devastating impact on civilians are on the rise, and the possibility of hostilities moving into new domains, such as cyber and outer space, is no longer unthinkable, breakdown is simply not an option. The only way forward is to break through. To break through the multidimensional challenges we have been facing, we need effective and innovative solutions. We need to hear from those who have been left out of the discussion. We need a multi-stakeholder, interdisciplinary approach which leverages diversity and inclusion. We need critical and empowered citizens who are equipped with the knowledge and skills to make informed decisions, meaningfully participate in disarmament efforts, and contribute to policy-making processes. The disarmament community of the future is being built today. At the beginning of March, we celebrated the first ever International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, which provided an opportunity to reflect on the role of awareness raising and education of broad audiences in fostering a better understanding of disarmament and non-proliferation's contribution to sustainable peace and security. It is important to note that this momentum was preceded by decades of remarkable collective efforts to draw attention to the distinct role of disarmament education, starting with the 10th Special Session of the General Assembly in 1978, the first international forum to declare disarmament education as urgent. The UNESCO World Congress on Disarmament Education followed shortly thereafter in 1980. 20 years later, in 2000, Mexico introduced the first General Assembly Resolution 55/33E, entitled United Nations Study on Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Education. The landmark 2002 study and its 34 recommendations that emerged from this initiative have guided our collective efforts in the UN, government, civil society, and academia ever since. At the same time, the educational landscape and toolbox has evolved significantly since then, as the biannual reports of the Secretary General demonstrate. Waning contribution to such reporting and limited resourcing for educational efforts are a testament to the challenges that still remain. The increasing strain on multilateral disarmament efforts and challenging environment for global disarmament should serve as a wake-up call for all of us to adopt a more strategic approach and invest in disarmament education among diverse audiences to achieve meaningful and lasting progress. The UNODA strategy is an opportunity for us to reinvigorate our efforts through a collective, partnership-driven approach to give disarmament education its rightful place as a central tool in disarmament actions. One that enjoys the support and investment of the diverse range of actors needed to achieve the reach and sustainable impact we identify therein. My office is committed to working towards this end and to educate and empower individuals to act as agents of change in advancing disarmament and non-proliferation goals. So to succeed in this ambitious endeavor, we will rely on invaluable contributions of all of you, our partners, from governments and academia to media, civil society groups, industry, and of course, young people. Let's inform, engage, educate, and empower together to create a safer, more peaceful, and sustainable future for all. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to the discussions today.
Thank you so much, Izumi. And before I introduce our event moderator to kick off our panel discussion, I'd like to invite you to direct your attention to a brief video to introduce the UNODA Disarmament Education Strategy. right, thank you, colleagues. We now turn to our distinguished panel representing many different experiences and perspectives on disarmament education. And I would like to start by introducing you to our wonderful moderator, and might I say, one of our greatest advocates for disarmament education and also a dear friend to UNODA, Counselor Tony Jaques. Counselor Tony Jaques has been a career diplomat since 1997. She is the current coordinator for disarmament and non-proliferation at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Mexico and representative of Mexico to the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, OPANAL, in Mexico City. She has served in numerous roles for the Mexican Foreign Ministry in capital and internationally, including most recently as disarmament expert and political coordinator at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations in New York between 2016 and 2022. From 2012 to 2016, she was acting Director General for the United Nations and Deputy Director General for Disarmament at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. Councillor Jaques has served as a member of Mexico's delegations to numerous disarmament meetings, and we are so thrilled to have her. I turn the floor to her to lead us through our panel discussion. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you also to UNODA for this opportunity, and the Secretary, and thanks to the Secretary General and the High Representative for the presentation of this strategy that is of the utmost importance for my country. I want to very briefly reiterate that this issue is very important for Mexico as for a lot of other countries in my region, but in the General Assembly and international community. As everybody knows, my government has been focused on the study of the United Nations on disarmament and non-proliferation education since its inception more than 20 years ago. We think that the results of the study and the recommendations remain current and relevant, but there are a lot of challenges still. The High Representative already touched upon a couple, and that is why this new strategy and this approach has become very important to follow. I want to address just a couple of the challenges before giving the floor to the panelists, and also to ask them to bear this in mind. The first issue that I want to refer to is that there is a sense of disbelief or lack of enthusiasm regarding disarmament affairs. There is more or less common knowledge or certain narrative that thinks that this is an issue that pertains to the Cold War, to the multilateral efforts of years that have passed, and that this has not produced any results or has not become very apparent for younger generations as a priority, as other issues in the multilateral arena, such as climate change or end of poverty or human rights and the application of Agenda 2030. So we need to combat this narrative, and we need to make this issue more than the education for disarmament issue, more than raising awareness. As the High Representative has just mentioned, the strategy itself of the Secretary General aims at creating empowerment for societies and for citizens. They need to be better equipped with tools to become agents of change and agents of force, and to make a more safer and secure world that is based on international law and international solidarity, not on weapons. Creating a culture of peace has to do with knowledge, yes, but also with this type of empowerment of future generations and societies. And the more than societies participate in the decision-making processes with the right tools, we can make this world peace a reality, not only a rhetorical, idealistic aspiration. But one of the challenges that we have is that this issue is not considered sometimes as relevant as it should be, or as priority as it should be. I want to mention an example, and that is my final point. Mexico has promoted, as you know, various educations and outreach activities on disarmament, but we have seen with a lot of despair that every 2 years that the General Assembly submits the draft resolution and adopts the draft resolution, United Nations Study for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Education, to the first committee. But not all governments submit the reports to the study. This is not acceptable for Mexico. All countries more share what they are doing in the field of disarmament education, and also on the field of education for peace. So we hope that these type of events and this new strategy motivates more government to get involved and share their experience and best practices in order to contribute to the study and to the report. And with that in mind, I want to finalize by reiterating that we share the view of the Secretary General in the agenda for disarmament, that disarmament is not an end in itself, it's a tool or a vehicle or a means towards an end. It is a means to save lives, to save humanities, to save future generations. And in this regard, we think that if we continue considering disarmament as a tool more than an end in itself, it can be easier for governments to get more involved in promoting this type of approach that doesn't have to do with geopolitics in a larger sense, but more with the participation of societies in the decision-making process. So having said that, I would like to pass the floor to the panelists and ask them to maybe comment on these issues, but also on why they think that disarmament is still relevant in this current age, and why we need to continue educating for disarmament. I would like to start right now with the first speaker. I am very, very proud to introduce Zia Mian, who is an award-winning physicist and co-director of Princeton University's program on science and global security, where he has worked since 1997. He is the co-editor of the international scientific journal Science and Global Security and a co-founder of the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction, and serves on the board of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Zia Mian is a member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters, and as of 2023, he's co-chair of the Scientific Advisory Group of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So, Zia, is very it's an honor and it's a privilege to have you here in the panel. And I would like to ask you to consider some of the issues that have already been presented, and additionally, what challenges exist to implementing disarmament education at the scale, and how can this be overcome? What are, in your view, some examples of successful disarmament education programs, and what lessons can be learned from them, or according to your very, very wide experience as an educator? The floor is yours, Zia.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, colleagues. Let me begin by making a couple of observations, if I might. I think one way to think about the issue of disarmament education is to not just focus on the need for more disarmament education, but to ask the question, how successful has disarmament education been already? And if you think about it in that context, it is in fact an astonishing success story. That when you ask the question, what do people in the world by and large think about issues of war, peace, and disarmament, there is no question that overwhelmingly people, and especially young people, those of the 21st century, widely believe with great conviction that war is a bad thing, that peace is a good thing, and that disarmament is desirable and necessary. And they can also see that there have been many, many successful instances of disarmament processes unfolding. The number of treaties that have been achieved in the past 20 or 30 years on a range of issues that once would have been unimaginable needs to be part of our conversation also. I mean, landmines, for example, have been part of the use of weapons by militaries for generations, and yet we created a treaty that bans landmines. Nuclear weapons were the greatest weapons of the 20th century, and yet we now have a treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons. And we've done the same with chemical weapons, with biological weapons, with cluster munitions, and now we have an initiative to ban the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. And if you think about it, the use of explosive weapons in populated areas has been the cornerstone of war making for 1,000 years, more or less. And so there's a gap between what people think we've already achieved and the sensibilities that are at work about what kind of world they want, which is encapsulated in their views and in these treaties. And I'll just share one fact that I think speaks to me in particular as an educator at a university, and that is that the students that we have and studies by the International Commission of the Red Cross, they did a survey of 16,000 young people in 16 countries a couple of years ago. And they found in that survey that 80% of young people that they surveyed said that the existence of nuclear weapons is a threat to humanity, and that 80% believe the use of nuclear weapons is never acceptable, and over half believe that nuclear weapons should be banned, and 3/4 think that wars are avoidable and not inevitable. So in that sense, the effort to help people, especially young people, understand war, peace, and disarmament has been, as I said, an astonishing success. And yet the challenges, and this is why I think we're here, and this is why the work of ODA, disarmament, and states, civil society, and experts is important, is that the same survey found that young people have experienced 2 decades of terrible war that they've seen unfold or experienced in person. And they see the world as almost powerless to stop such wars. And in the survey that ICRC did, about half of young people think it's more likely than not that there will be a 3rd World War in their lifetime. So I think this is where we have to focus our conversation, the gap between what they think is possible and what they've seen in terms of disarmament and peacemaking, and what they see as war and the practice of war that is going on. And now everybody in the world is seeing this terrible war in Ukraine and the unbelievable suffering that that is bringing both to people in Ukraine and others around the world. So I think if I had to think about it, I'd say that it's right that in the strategy, disarmament education strategy, the strategy refers to the centrality of empowerment. And I'll just quote from the strategy. It talks about empowering people to act as national and world citizens. And I think it is this idea of giving people agency, not just information, but agency at both national level as citizens in their own societies, but also as world citizens. In other words, how to think about and act beyond borders in collective human activities that can address these collective challenges that we face. And I think that in terms of dealing with where we are, at least in the physics world, the scientific world, there is an important precedent, and I'm just going to want to put that on the table and then I'll stop. In the same year that the United Nations had its first meeting, 1946, and passed Resolution 1, calling for a plan for the abolition of nuclear weapons, just down the street in Princeton from my office, Albert Einstein gathered a group of scientists and said, we need to do something about the threat of nuclear weapons. And so they launched one of the first organizations in the world to think about what can we do. And what they came up with was the idea of education. And Einstein wrote a letter to physicists and scientists all over the world asking for $1 million in 1946 to launch a campaign for disarmament education. And in that letter, he said that our only hope, our security and hope lies in, and I quote, an informed citizenry that will act for life and not for death. And the idea that you have to have an informed citizenry acting together was the goal of this disarmament education campaign in 1946. And, you know, they didn't quite raise $1 million, but not far off. And they made the first documentary films, the first radio programs, they gave lectures, they did all kinds of things. And it began to transform the public understanding of nuclear weapons. And I think what we need to think about in this is how education can be a transformative process, a political process that takes people outside the idea that education is what happens in classrooms, but as part of a social political engagement where you understand the world critically and have an ethical obligation that you accept to act both within your community, within your country, and transnationally. And I think that's the challenge that disarmament education focuses, how to address that set of issues. And I think the disarmament education strategy, by recognizing the centrality of this goal, opens up this question in a fundamental way that is very valuable at this time.
Thank you so much, Zia. I think that your presentation is giving us a lot of food for thought, and thank you for the reminder of how this issue has been present in the international community even before the formal work of the United Nations on multilateral disarmament started, even from the beginning of the United Nations era. I want to pass the floor now to our second speaker, and I am very honored to introduce Fernando Marquez. He has been a diplomat for the past 15 years and currently serves as First Secretary and alternate permanent representative of the Republic of Angola in Vienna. He served in Moscow and in New York and at the UN Security Council during the mandate of Angola as a non-permanent member from 2015 to 2016. He has been engaged in several disarmament files, such as Angola's adhesion to a ratification of the CWC, the BWC, the CTBT, and the signature of the TPNW and the Convention of the Nuclear Safety and the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. In 2017, he had the honor to be selected with other 24 diplomats to participate in the UN Disarmament Fellowship Program. And this is the issue that he will be talking about. Over the years, since 1979, the Disarmament Fellowship Program has contributed to supporting new generations of disarmament leaders. The annual program aims at training and specialization of national officials, particularly from developing countries, to enable them to participate more effectively in international deliberating and negotiating fora. Alumni from previous cohorts are now serving in top leadership positions in their countries, as well as in international organizations. Fernando, it is an honor to ask you to address this issue, but also to explain to our audience how the participation in this program shaped your way of thinking about disarmament and other global issues. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to the audience in New York and in other areas. So let me say that it's my great honor being here as part of this program. But in fact, I would be invited as a representative of this program. I'm not representative. I cannot talk on behalf of a large number of former fellows. but I can deliver my own experience on as part of this program. And I would like to start saying that I'm from Angola, and Angola, as you may know, have been facing a civil war during almost 30 years. And before I made this program on disarmament, I was acting as a diplomat in Moscow and also serving during the mandate of Angola in the Security Council. So during this period, I was facing and dealing with disarmament issues also, but more at the political level. And after the program in 2017, I had the great opportunity to get some informations regarding disarmament as a whole. Not particularly on the perspective of political issues, because I'm diplomat and remaining colleagues of the program were diplomats also, but because of the social experience we had during this almost 90 days together. And we visited many countries where disarmament is a high priority of the government and societies also. And also because during this period, we could meet directly relevant stakeholders on international disarmament as seniors of international organizations. We talked also with people, survivors of the countries were affected directly by the bombardment of during the Second World War, and also we had the opportunity to face the impact, especially the positive impact of disarmament. And rather than this political component, we can also refer here that disarmament has a strong impact on economics and social issues. I will give you an example on my own and national perspective. The reducing of small and light arms in Angola, and I do believe in many developing countries, reduces also the level of criminalities and reduces or increase the public security. Another example I can do or mention is the landmines, where we could easily understand that once we discontaminate areas, these areas can facilitate the mobility of these local communities, as well as we can use, or the local communities can use the land for agricultural purposes or for other economic and social purposes. For these local communities that they live and they are directly affected by these artifacts, for sure they have a different aspects, understand that disarmament rather than politics is also or has also this social and economic impact, positive impact. Lastly, I'd like to say that this program on disarmament also increased my knowledge about the peace and security issues and also geopolitical issues. We do know that nowadays talking about disarmament is something quite challenging, but I think we cannot stop talking about disarmament. And I do understand that the first panelist, Mrs. Zaya, came from the university, and we do appreciate the presentation, but we need to work and continue working with the academia, with the CSOs, civil society organizations, and all stakeholders that can be involved in this strategy, I think could be very, very helpful. I thank you.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Fernando, and thank you for having shared with us some of the Angola's experience, but most importantly, your view as a former disarmament fellow on how this program impacted your thinking. I think that we are going to continue following your lead in and never stop talking about disarmament. I want to pass the floor now to our third speaker, Anthony Deutsch. He has a 25-year career with the newswires. At 21, he became a business and tech reporter at Dow Jones before joining the Associated Press. He opened an office in The Hague to report on war crimes and then went on to cover several conflicts for the AP, including Iraq, Sri Lanka, and East Timor. Most recently, he has reported extensively on the use of chemical weapons in Syria and war crimes in Ukraine since the Russian invasion. He was the AP bureau chief in Jakarta and Financial Times correspondent in Indonesia before joining Reuters as a special correspondent in Europe in 2012. I think that his participation is going to be crucial for the issue that has been repeated already several times in this panel about partnerships and multisectoriality of education for disarmament. The media has a vital role in getting the message out, especially disarmament education. So I would like to ask him, what can the UN do to facilitate the media's work on making disarmament relevant and accessible to the public and eventually mobilize support or more support? So, Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think maybe I'd start by just saying I think the fact that you have invited me today to speak is already an important signal, because thinking of the media early on is important. When I was a young reporter, covering trials from the Yugoslav war out of The Hague, I had been writing about the conflict for several years when I mentioned to my boss that I had never actually been to the Balkans. And I proposed going for a month to write about the aftermath of those conflicts. That was so that I could get firsthand experience of what people were going through who had lived through those conflicts. And while I can't make the work any easier in non-proliferation and disarmament, what I'm still trying to do after more than 25 years of writing about conflict is to bring those stories to as many people as possible so that they understand what's going on the ground. And now that I'm almost 50 and I have 3 children, I decided late last year to go to Ukraine. And I was there in November and December, and I went and spent 3 weeks on the front line down in Kherson. And the reason I decided to do that is not because I'm an adventure seeker, but I think that it's important to tell the stories of the people who are living there and who are the victims of the use of arms. And when I was there interviewing people, there were rockets landing, shells, mortars, and on the road back and forth into Kherson was littered with the arms and unexploded ordnances of conflict. So what I would say is that it's so important to engage the media early, because the more we know and the more we are prepared, the better we are at telling those stories and getting the word out to people. And part of that is getting access to people who are engaged in disarmament affairs. You know, we get our own access to where things are going on, and we have to cover breaking news. But the better we are prepared about this and the more access we have to experts, the more valuable, I think, and the greater the contribution is that we can make, and the better the quality of the type of news gathering and the stories that we produce. I was recently standing in front of a class and I asked of young students, to university students, and they were telling me how fewer younger people were reading Reuters, reading news, hard news. And part of it was because a lot of the time it's bad news. There's not a lot we can do about that. But one of the other things they mentioned was that a lot of the time they felt that the news was too dense and inaccessible. So it was too complicated. And these were even for university students saying that it was just too much. So making that language accessible, and ultimately we need to tell stories. The way that you bring the message, you get the message to people and as many people as possible, is by making sure that you have those stories and that there's a way to present it to people, because that's how they understand and sympathize with people. And I think it's a good way to engage them in disarmament. Yeah, so that's what I'd like to say in terms of opening comments. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Anthony. I think that you hit the nail in the right place, because and I confess I am guilty as charged. All the especially multilateral diplomats and policymakers are used to speaking in language that is not citizen language, and that creates an artificial barrier that we should be more aware of, especially speaking in acronyms. So we need to consider this as policymakers and diplomats in order to reach more people. So thank you for reminding us of that. I want to continue with the presentations, and I am very happy to introduce the new speaker, who is the representative of the youth. So I am very interested in continuing this talk about how partnerships can be forged, and the opinion of young people is crucial for this effort. So Leah Hola, in 2022, UNODA's the Youth for Disarmament Initiative selected 25 young people from 400 applications to participate in the Leaders for Tomorrow workshop series, based on their demonstration of strong leadership in youth-led organizations working in the field of international peace and security. With the financial support from the Republic of Korea, the group explored the linkages between disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control with 5 topics related to international peace and security. The monthly sessions were conducted with practitioners from the UN entities, civil society, and youth-led initiatives. Following the completion of the program, the Leaders for Tomorrow presented their projects to engage youth during a first committee side event under the Disarmament Education and Solution for Peace. One of these Leaders for Tomorrow is Leah. Leah works as the executive director of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War Canada, and studies physics and political sciences at McGill University. She has been active in peace and disarmament for the past 7 years. She was very grateful to take part in the Leaders for Tomorrow program and hopes to continue working with in the future with the other leaders to find intersections between existing movements aiming to build a more equitable future and eliminate existential threats from our panel. So I am very grateful for your participation and for your engagement. And I would like you to speak on how you think that young leaders have a potential to spark a ripple effect in their local communities. How can youth and civil society advocates help to push the agenda forward, the disarmament agenda, but also the disarmament education agenda forward? So the floor is yours, Leah.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much for the introduction. Young people today, agreeing with the stats Professor Zia shared, really do believe that the world can change, and it's really evident, and you can see it in the fact that people are mobilizing and organizing and creating educational resources on climate change, for feminism, against war, and against racism, all over the world. And these like disarmament, these movements are all interconnected by the drive to eliminate existing existential threats and build systems that prioritize health for the people and the planet, as well as prioritize humanity. However, disarmament cannot be a sustainable reality now or in the future if young people don't know what disarmament is. At the first committee meeting with the Leaders for Tomorrow, we surveyed the room and we asked the 25 leaders, as well as many other young professionals and academics and people in media, if any of them had heard about disarmament or learned about it in school. So even just as simple as what it is, before they finished high school, and not one person, or after they finished high school, and not one person had that experience in their education. I am here, as well as everyone else, every other, or many of the other, I'm sure, Leaders of Tomorrow, as a result of the educational programs that various stakeholders and individuals and civil societies invested in. And I'll forever be grateful for my personal experience of the work of Dr. Mary Wynne Ashford and other members of Canadian civil society who invested in educational and interpersonal mentorship. And for every webinar, workshop, event, and educational resource that's created, it has that same potential to change someone's perspective and potentially life direction. And that's evident in the various stories of various the leaders for tomorrow. But on the institutional level, disarmament is really significantly missing from education. Young people care, young people really want to change, but anti-violence and disarmament isn't in the narrative. I think the Youth for Disarmament community is really excellent example, and I'm so happy to see this strategy being released by the UNODA. But the Youth for Disarmament community and Leaders for Disarmament program really exemplified how effective institutions can be in fostering ripples to transform into waves. The program filled a gap in disarmament that really didn't exist before. It's the first space for young people who from intersectional backgrounds in different fields across regions to discuss disarmament. The global and intertwined nature of these issues, from climate change to disarmament, transcend geographic boundaries and transcend the categories we put them in. So creating spaces for connections and creating centralizing partnership is really, really, really key in enabling a global mindset. I'd been working with IPPNW Canada and Voice of Women for Peace and other Canadian organizations in my community for many years, but through this program and through the Youth for Disarmament space was the first time I was able to bring the global perspective and contextualize it, because the issue of armament really cannot be thought of in a silo or in a community. While it's possible to take action in your community, the global mindset and spaces are really, really crucial. So institutionalizing those partnerships is really, really essential in transforming the ripples individual, especially young people, can make, and creating institutional support for those young people as all people in disarmament is really essential if we want to bring turn ripples into waves and waves into tsunamis. Disarmament education is also a really necessary step in the inclusion of other groups, specifically groups marginalized from security spaces. So young people, women, queer communities, indigenous communities, frontline communities. And education can be a source of empowerment and exchange of knowledge. But it's really important. My biggest takeaway over the last year or so is to think about education not as passing a baton, but building a bridge. Lending knowledge and visibility to marginalized community has really, really limited benefits if we're only training people to reproduce mainstream thoughts. If we're including new voices into the spaces and bringing education to young people, we've got to also allow for room for opposing ideas. I felt this the first time this past summer when working with I've normally run workshops for university and high school students. Working with 10-year-olds, I realized that I was a little uncomfortable when somebody said something that went against what the lesson plan was. which made me reflect on the purpose of the education, which education has the power to transform the way we think about these things. It's not just, we're not depositing knowledge into people like money into a bank. It is a bridge being built. And if we allow for tension, we're able to more clearly locate the principles that limit the utility of the current way we're approaching disarmament and the current way we're approaching security. So in order to create intersectional education, we also have to allow for opposing ideas, especially when bringing in marginalized communities and new voices into disarmament spaces. Education has the power to transform the way we theorize, discuss, and take action on peace and security. Change isn't naive, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. And the presence of disarmament education, and both how much it's present and also how effective it is, will shape how the world changes. So thank you so much for the UNODA and for the Youth for Disarmament for your work to institutionalize disarmament education and for your continued investment. An investment in disarmament education is also an investment in international security and in our common future. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Leah, for your enthusiasm and for giving us, returning some faith in young people to us, to all of us. I want to now ask a question for all the panelists, something that has been mentioned, touched upon in all the presentations. This is an issue that requires a lot of actors and a lot of sectors to be involved, and the way public policy has to be implemented needs the participation of different actors and different participants, not only governments and not only academic institutions. So this is why the Disarmament Education Strategy is very focused on partnerships. And also partnerships is a requirement of the application, implementation of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. So this is an issue that the governments have been thinking about if we are serious about fulfilling our commitments under Agenda 2030, which is around the corner. I can't believe that it is just 7 years from the taking stock of the Agenda 2030. So in this vein, I would like to ask, where do you see these partnerships for disarmament education's efforts in the future? For example, in 10 years' time, what do you think a partnership will look like? What practical steps are necessary to strengthen the partnerships for education for disarmament? So I would like to ask first the High Representative, Izumi Nakamitsu, on this issue, and then I will start giving the floor to all the panelists to consider this and also to make other comments of what has been said if they desire. So Izumi, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. And I also really want to thank all the panelists. It's been a very exciting, very energetic panel discussions and presentations. So thank you very, very much for all your contributions this morning. So partnership, obviously, it is indeed an indispensable pillar. I would say it is probably one of the most important approach that we take in this education strategy, because it will, enhance the reach and, of course, the sustainability. And of course, as a result, we think that long-term impact of disarmament education efforts will be really strengthened and increased. And together with partnership approach, we also see that, some of the key messages that we are trying to send, such as inclusiveness, diversity, these are, of course, central efforts also in terms of how partnerships can be made more effective. and if you will, fit for purpose in our educational approaches. Now, for this, I think it's really important that we break down the silos. We think holistically, and we reach out and strengthen participation of various stakeholders, not traditionally considered relevant even to the disarmament field, and draw on the added value of divergent, different perspectives and comparative advantages of different partners in different domains to tailor disarmament education to different audiences and different contexts as well. So there again, I think partnership is critical. Now, with all these, I actually remain optimistic about the willingness of various actors, diverse actors, to come together and leverage disarmament education as one of the key tools to advance disarmament and non-proliferation goals. Now, the time is very difficult at the moment, as we all know, but with this partnership approach and investment in education, I think political commitment and strategic investments in this area of work will have to come together. And I'm pretty sure that it will yield eventually the desired outcome. Now, our disarmament education strategy actually itself is that sort of a collaborative efforts. We did a lot of consultations with external stakeholders, and these consultations really informed us, and I would say even shaped the key focus areas and goals that are articulated in our strategy. We, of course, try to leverage the convening and connecting power, if you will, of the UN in terms of implementing its new education strategy. So as such, we obviously commit fully to generating more opportunities for engagement of broad multi-stakeholder groups at global and regional levels. I was very happy to hear creating space for young people. That sort of efforts will definitely continue. We sort of use a catchphrase of multi-stakeholder, but I think in this, we are really talking about global and regional level networks of partners, including, energetic young people who will be focused on disarmament and non-proliferation and arms control education. Now, my another comment will be, we need to actually look at the, if you will, force multiplier effect of working with and also working through others, partners, to reach really broad audiences. And we're a small entity, UNODA, there is a limit to what we can do ourselves. But if we take training of trainers and educating of educators, there will be a multiple impact that we can start to create. So education and empowerment really must be linked for us to achieve the desired and sustainable impact of our collective work. You asked, where do we see 10 years from now in terms of partnership? I definitely do want to see that in a few years' time already, we will begin to have multiple layers and levels of partnerships that are starting to reach and bring about impacts. And for that, we would definitely continue our targeted efforts through fellowships. Thank you for your experience as fellowship. We also want to see what kind of scholarship and mentorship and career building initiatives for underrepresented actors in disarmament, including women, representative from Global South, really key, and of course, young people. These targeted efforts will be absolutely paramount. And, you might know that very recent development, we have received a quite sizable funding from Japan, $10 million, which is a youth leader fund. So we will be able to create engagement opportunities for the world youth leaders, or creating world youth leaders on this particular issue. So my final word, I really want to encourage member states, regional organizations, international organizations, and of course civil society actors to come together and give us inputs to the biannual report of the Secretary General, which still is an important instrument, if you will. So please join us, join our efforts, let's try to make a collective efforts which will begin to demonstrate a visible impact in disarmament education, and that will reflect the current disarmament education landscape, which I would say, like everything else, it is always evolving. So the landscape is very different from some 20 years ago when the first UN study was submitted. Let us join forces together, and we consider that it is a key endeavor to ensure that disarmament education remains dynamic and definitely contributing in a big way to building a culture of peace and non-violence, in addition to disarmament and non-proliferation issues. So let's make this partnership a sustainable and long-lived and an impactful one.
Thank you, Izumi, and thank you for the clarity regarding not working in silos, because partnerships are very sometimes evident. We need the collaboration of different sectors, but we forget that if we continue working compartmentalizing issues, then the task becomes more difficult. Anthony, I would like to give the floor to you to see if you would like to add a few thoughts from your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose what I would, I'm not going to wager any bets on 10 years from now. So I have trouble figuring out what's going to happen next week. So I'm going to stick to at the moment. But I would say that it's really important. There's a lot more hostility towards the media now. If I look back when I started my career, and I'd say in general, people and organizations are not as engaging with the media as they used to be. And I'm not sure what's at the heart of that, but what I think would help is that if the more people are trained on engaging with the media and learn how to deal with the media, that if you build relationships with people in the media and make sure that you have a relationship before there's a crisis, that really helps on how information is brought to the public, for example, when there is a crisis. But it also enables us to do our work better. So yeah, I would say I would stress that it's important to engage the media really early on. This is a great example of that. But don't wait until it's last minute. So empower people with the knowledge. How do you build a relationship with the media? What's important, and how can you create a partnership with the media rather than that the media is something that people are afraid of, right? Because people, if they've never done it before, and you all of a sudden have to engage with a very large news agency, you might be less inclined to speak. So I think that's a missed opportunity. And particularly when the work that's being done is honorable work. And in this case, we're talking about an extremely important endeavor. So yeah, I would say don't be shy and encourage early relationships with the media. And I think that the more you do that, the stronger that partnership will be. And that benefits everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Your words are, a reminder also of what the Secretary General says frequently, that there is a deficit of trust between citizens and the institutions, and maybe that is also pertinent to to consider when we talk about the relationship between governments and actors with the media. So we need to consider trusting each other more in order to disseminate the message in a more efficient manner. I would like to ask Fernando to add some perspective from the governmental point of view and former fellow disarmament in the Disarmament Fellowship.
Thank you, Maria. Once again, I would like to add my voice to Ms. Izumi and also to Anthony. Just for 3 quick remarks. And my first one is continuing seeing the international disarmament and non-proliferation in 3 levels: international, regional, and national. We used to see very commonly, especially at political level, at international, and then the implementation of these international instruments at national level. But regional level is quite important also. We need to consider all the time these 3 levels. This is my first remark. The second one is related with the coordination. And I'm quite delighted when I see programs like the program Leaders for Tomorrow that Leah is part of. And we do know that there are many initiatives on this field at national level, regional level, international level. And I think one of the most important challenge in terms of this multi-stakeholder approach is to engage and to coordinate all these initiatives. And I do know that UNODA have these tools to make it happen, to coordinate all these international, regional, and national initiatives and bring to the light all these topics. And my last remark is related with educational contents. Most likely Professor Azaya will go in deep on this topic, but we do know that educational contents are very important also to disseminate the message. And yes, I will challenge Professor Zaya to bring some ideas to increase this topic. I thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. I think that those are very valid points, and I hope that Zia and others accept the challenge. But we have come also a long way. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate UNODA for the amount of materials and content that has been updated recently in the website. I would like to invite all speakers and also to all the participants to refer to these materials whenever there is a need for updated information. The only complaint I have is that not all of the materials are in other languages or languages other than English, but that is a challenge that all the UN institutions have. But we need to also continue addressing and getting funds in order to ensure multilingualism also in the contents of UNODA. So, Leah, would you like to make a few additional remarks on this issue?
Sure, thank you so much. I thank you so much also to the UNODA for the continued investment in education. I hope that in the future 10 years that the UNODA continues to provide and grows a space for young leaders, as all leaders of existing movements that are focused on protecting humanity, to exchange knowledge, find intersections, and build connections internationally while continuing to plan regionally under the umbrella of disarmament. I think having an institutional space provides a lot of legitimacy and institutional memory that would otherwise be lost if not for if only on individual relationships. I also hope in the next 10 years that it can continue to consult and work with young people and other marginalized groups that to tailor the educational initiatives to maximize all benefit when continuing these programs. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Leah. And well, last but not least, Zia, would you like to add a few remarks on this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Just two quick comments since we're getting to the end. One is that partnership grows by doing things together. And so we actually need to start doing things together. And I think one of the things that I would urge colleagues to consider is that the 20 years of the disarmament education that we've been discussing, 20 years before that was the launch of the World Disarmament Campaign by the General Assembly in a decision taken in 1982, and the World Disarmament Campaign began in 1983. Can you imagine what we could do now with modern forms of communication if we were to take up that goal again and say that we will launch a World Disarmament Campaign? We have so much more international civil society than we did in 1982 and 1983. We have many more organizations of scientists, artists, young people, existing networks that show what kind of work is possible with modern communication tools in the present situation. And I think so part of the goal is to set the scale of our ambition. And we can either do this in kind of modest steps, or we can embed those modest steps in a campaign and a vision that says, okay, in the next 10 years, we will actually run a world disarmament campaign that will gather momentum and learn from its own work and develop these partnerships to create enduring relationships that will keep going forward after that, once we've been through all of these efforts. As Fernando says, within countries, in regions, because there are so many regional organizations and structures that didn't exist back then, and at the global level. So I think part of it is to frame our work and our partnership building within a vision of a campaigning process that is a collective activity that creates opportunities for partnerships to build and grow and deepen, shared with a common vision. And so I would urge states, parties, and NGOs to think about what would be involved in launching a new world disarmament campaign for the 21st century.
Thank you, Zia, for that proposal, and also for reminding us that we need to be ambitious in order to we need to think about what we think it's impossible in order to achieve the feasible, and to be proactive. I think that we're getting close to the end of the session. I just want to add a few comments of some boss maybe phrases that might be important to continue focusing on. And I want to also again pay tribute to the agenda for disarmament of the Secretary General, that has demonstrated that silos can be broken, especially when we consider the disarmament affairs in comparison in relationship with other issues of the United Nations. For example, peace building, peacekeeping, and sustaining peace, and this had not been considered in this way until the agenda for disarmament. So this is a new thing that we can build on. And it sounds very basic, but it is really an important demonstration of how silos can be broken, and also how, as our mantra in international relations in the UN sites, we cannot have development without peace, and peace without development. But this brings me to another thing that Anthony mentioned when he spoke about his experience as a conflicts reporter, is that sometimes an international community focuses a lot on studying conflicts and wars and conflicts and the relationship between weapons and war. And we are not so focused on the disarmament, the relationship, organic relationship between disarmament and peace. And I think that the education for disarmament should do that. Provide tools, empower younger generations and all citizens of the world to realize that if there is disarmament, there are better chances to have a more peaceful world, and everybody has a chance to participate in this in one way or the other, through governmental channels or through our own attitude towards a non-violent society and a more sound and established culture of peace. So this is the challenge, and this is what we need to be doing, education for disarmament for a more peaceful world, instead of just raising awareness or basic knowledge about weapons and about conflicts. So this is the challenge for the next generation of diplomats and NGOs and academia for the 21st century, in my view. This would be my final comment, and I would pass the floor to Rebecca. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to participate and moderate, and to give also our views on this issue that is very, very important.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony. Thank you to all of our speakers and also the participants online. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. We have been getting questions from the audience, and sorry we don't have time for all of those today. But really, it's been such a joy and pleasure to celebrate disarmament education today. I really have taken away from this a real kind of optimistic and forward-looking perspective, and I think this kind of passionate discussion really affirms that you know, it's an affirmation of the solid foundation on which this education partnership rests, and on which we have to, you know, capitalize if we want to achieve the collective impact that we seek. And all of you today have talked in one way or another about the human dimension of disarmament and disarmament education. I think that's really important. The importance of understanding people's diverse experiences, their perspectives, and then empowering them with the tools they need to be agents of change and working across borders and disciplines and communities. So that's really a theme that I take away from today's discussion. And of course, I invite all of our participants and our audience online to have a more thorough look at the UNODA Disarmament Education Strategy. It's available on our office's publication website, along with other resources that Tony also mentioned. So please do take advantage of that and be in touch with us. We are always keen to hear from you. And yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your continued support to inform, engage, educate, empower current and future generations of disarmament leaders. So I will close this event with a huge thanks to all involved. Take care.